Welcome, everybody, to Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, and it is now a course at NYU and an elective towards the journalism certificate. Every week, I speak with novelists, with authors, with writers of every niche to talk about their tips, their tricks, their strategies, and how the sauce is made, including creative advice. I'll talk about essays and articles and share my own experience from 3 decades of publishing. So join me every week and grow your business and build your craft with Freelance Writing Direct. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes, and follow along on Substack, where I share special clips for subscribers only at estelleserasmus.substack.com. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, and today is a special pleasure for me. I am talking to best-selling authors Caroline Leavitt and Annabelle Gurwitch with us today, who are also in the book On Being Jewish Now, which is such an important book. It came out October 1st, and it will be out in paperback November 1st. And it's 75 authors talking about what it is to be Jewish now and their stories. And we are in such a fraught time. Recently, it was the 1-year anniversary of what Hamas did when they came and they attacked and they took hostages that are still there, including American citizens. And I want to talk to both of you because you are both best-selling authors with wonderful books to your name, and you are proud Jewish women and writers, and I want to understand the impetus of being part of this project, which is the wonderful Zibby Owens is the editor of it, and it's Zibby Books, and Zibby's been a guest on my podcast, as well as some of the other authors who are in it, Jemina Rekoff and Eliza Licht and Jane L. Rosen. And so let's start with you, Caroline. You wrote Good to Be Jewish, Even If I'm Not a Good Jew. And it's so relatable because, and I'll let you explain what it's about, but how do we be a Jew? What do we do? How should we act? Do we have to have Shabbat? And you have a really great take on it. So if you could just explain a little bit about your essay. And thank you so much for doing this.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here. And I'm thrilled to be here also with Annabelle Gurwitch. I'm the granddaughter of an Orthodox rabbi. He died when I was 2. My mom was one of 8 kids. Her mother escaped the pogroms and the Tsar in Russia, and they had a very, very Jewish life. But when my mom was 18 or so, I believe, her father, the rabbi, dropped dead very suddenly. And my mother said, if there's a God and he did this, I don't want to believe in him anymore. So she stopped being Jewish, but she still sort of clung to some stuff. My mom married, and my sister and I were not really raised Jewish. I had no idea like what that was. And oddly enough, my parents moved to a very Christian neighborhood. And my first encounter with that was kids would come up to me and they'd stick their hands in my hair and say, "Where are your horns?" And I would say, "What are you talking about?" Or they'd say, "You killed Christ." And I'd go home and ask my mother, "Who's Christ?" What is this? I don't know. There was a lot of anti-Semitism in school, and I didn't realize it was anti-Semitism. It was more like 2nd grade, we got a test, and the first question was about Jesus and Mary at the well. And I had no idea what was going on. And I got an F on the test. And the teacher sent the test home to my mom. And my mom marched up to the principal and said, "How can you do this? My daughter is a Jewish." And the principal said, "Oh, you people are so sensitive." And it just kept going on and on like that. And I had friends who couldn't play with me. And I just said, I don't really want any part of this. This is too hard for me. And it wasn't until I got married and we had a son that I began to think, you know what? I want my son to have a choice. I want him to have a choice. And I had some really helpful Jewish friends. One of my friends, the poet Roshel Shapiro, sent us these Sherry Lewis videotapes. It's like Sherry Lewis's Passover tape. And my son Max and I and my husband, we just watched it over and over again because it was so much fun and it was also educational. And I thought, oh, I don't really know this stuff. And I started to appreciate it. So we went through all the Sherry Luther videos. We bought him all these books about Jewish holidays, and I began to read more. And it was actually the first time I read the Diary of Anne Frank, and I was just devastated. I just began to think, this is who I am. There's cellular memory, there's the DNA. This is exactly who I am. So when my son turned 12, we asked him, do you want to have a bar mitzvah? And he said, oh, yeah, 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 I do. He was in a class of 13 at a charter school. There were one other Jewish kid, and he said, I want to invite everybody. And it was so amazing because these kids were so excited to go to their first bar mitzvah, and all the girls got their hair done and they got dresses, and it was just 30 kids and close family in an old rock and roll club in Hoboken, Maxwell's. The kids loved it. We had photographs, and I just happy cried through the whole thing because it was at that moment that I realized what it really meant to be Jewish. It was something that had been passed down to me, and it was something that I was passing down to my son. It was a connection to people that went back thousands of years, and I began to write about it. That's why in my essay I say that, maybe I don't go to temple, we don't celebrate Shabbat, but I celebrate it in my books. And Days of Wonder is full of my mother's stories. It's just full of like the things that my mother loved so much about growing up in a Jewish home, or that the love, the community, the feeling that you're going to be protected. And even in a very ultra religious community like the Hasidic community, I talked to a lot of people who still were in that community, and I talked to people who had left. And the one thing I always asked them was, what do you miss now that you left? And they all said the community, the feeling that we're a part of something bigger than we are. And that was something that I just wanted to write about. And it's opened up a whole world for me now because I don't think I'm ever going to write a novel without a Jewish heroine in it anymore.
I love that. And, it's so interesting that you use Shari Lewis, who had the puppet lamb chop. I remember the Shari Lewis theater, I think they used to have, or maybe they had, they played it over and over. And I think it's so great that you use like kind of the children's world to
Mhm.
introduce this to your son. And it works both ways, right? Like they're sometimes
Yep.
using education now with very young kids to
Yep.
turn them against. And so now with after 10/7, how did your connection change? Or, you had mentioned this, ancestral memory, which I think it got activated in all of
Yeah.
us. It certainly did in me. How did that change even further your relationship to being Jewish?
It definitely deepened it. It's been a really frightening time. And one of my closest friends, the writer Leora Skulkin Smith, her mother grew up Jewish, living in Israel among Palestinians, and they were all, interconnected, and it was before everything started. And when war broke out, I was just so horrified because so much of the rage against Israel was about it was really anti-Semitism. It's really anti-Semitism. And when I saw that they started, not wanting to have Jewish writers and canceling them, I spoke out about it on Facebook. And to my surprise, I got hate comments. I was really totally devastated. It was sort of like people were missing the point because I wasn't I was talking about people like, why can't we form a connection, and why is it? And it was clearly anti-Semitic stuff, and I ended up having to block some people, which I really didn't want to do because I thought, well, maybe we can have a discussion, but there was no discussion to be had. And I found later that one of the writers who I had blocked had put on her Facebook page that my page was all about hate 101. And I thought, why is this? This is not the way to broker any sort of understanding or any sort of peace. And I worry hugely about it because it seems like people are not understanding all the history behind this, and people are not understanding all the ancestral pain. And I just am really worried about what's going to happen and the increasing anti-Semitism. And the weird thing is that Jews are such a small minority of the world. And yet every time something happens, it's like piled on them. And to me, that's terrifying. That's really terrifying.
I agree. I mean, so many important points here. Annabelle, first of all, before we talk about your essay, do you have anything additional you want to add to this discussion?
Well, it's interesting hearing Caroline when I hear you speak because, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to participate in this book, is that as Jewish Americans, American Jews, and writers, people who, let's just not make a blanket statement, tend towards the contemplative and are considering how we live. I think that the stories and are so different in this book, and this idea of on being Jewish now, the title to me was an invitation to explore and to investigate this idea that we come to our own understanding and identification of what being Jewish means to us. And that's a really interesting idea that's
Mhm.
culturally baked in, I feel, to most of our experience, unless you're in a very rigid fundamentalist kind of Judaism, that you find your own way of identifying. And that's an amazing thing and something to be celebrated. And I thought being a part of this book, we could all have a chance to have a voice in that. And in particular, two things I wanted to mention. One is that I happened to be in Israel a few weeks before the war broke out and before the Hamas attack. And it was a very interesting time it seems like 1,000 years have passed since a year ago. I was on my way to Uganda to participate in a project where we create theater and we create an art space for young people in refugee spaces. It's called the Campfire Project. And I was stuck in between countries coming from a conference. It was really kind of this amazing thing. And I was in Singapore on my way to Uganda, and I didn't know where to spend a few days. And I wanted to visit a friend in Tel Aviv for Rosh Hashanah. So this was this time last year, before the war. And it was an amazing time because it was a time people were protesting Netanyahu's government and really challenging the idea of how we live together with the Palestinian population. And it was exciting. And it seemed change was in the air. People were really reflecting on what kind of Israel could there be. And so much has been lost in this time. And there's just been so many losses. And I was so glad I got to be there. And I, it's so hard to hang on to hope for a future. But this is part of the reason why I wanted to be part of this book, is because for me, the way I relate to being Jewish, I was never unaware of my Jewish ancestry because of my family's experience of being othered, even in this country.
Right.
Was part of my family was part of a wave of immigration, and this is what I write about in the book. from the pogroms in Russia that settled in the American South, where we were a minority and really stuck out. Now, when I came into the picture in 1961, even I experienced this, but my ancestors really experienced this. They had a kind of a shtetl experience in the United States where it was different than Jews who came to the North, where there were large communities. We were a really relatively small community that really stuck out and had to band together. And there were many, many fantastic things that came from that, from this really tight community, but also we weren't in the larger community. And I wanted to reflect on that experience because that for me was really important in terms of this time we're living in, with not only growing anti-Semitism, but anti-migrant and immigrant, the kind of animus that's arisen in this country. And for me, it's a call to action as a Jewish person. And this is such an important part of the Jewish experience, being in a diaspora. And so this moment in time, I feel, and I hope my story encourages this warm welcome that we can give to other immigrants. And I really felt that was, I mean, yes, October 7th was a call to action and a call to contemplation of what being Jewish meant. For me, the drumbeat of the anti-immigrant feeling in the country and around the world, and this challenging this idea of what our ancestry asks us to do now, how to live on being Jewish now. That
Yeah.
was really why I wanted to write this story that I hope is really funny, but also is really comes from this serious place of honoring this notion and important. This is one of my most important values in life. And I think that comes from my ancestors and trying to create a different experience for them, for people now.
Yeah, it's this idea that the immigrants came and they looked for a better life for their families. And that's how they continued to build up. And education was always very important. And I love that you have in your short essay, you have a character who's your ancestor, and she's really kind of relatable. And I just want to read a little piece from your essay. My grandmother, Rebecca, always stressed the importance of knowing who someone's people were. She never took into account that people might not like us if they considered who our people were. Malcolm Gladwell wrote in The New Yorker in 2014 about, quote, climbing the crooked ladder of success as a way of describing how immigrant families worked on the margins to become respectable pillars of society. Their aim wasn't the establishment of a criminal empire, it was the advancement of the clan. And then you go on to say Bert, who is your great grandfather, Bert found his welding skills to be invaluable in maintaining local bootlegger stills. And that's how he wound up in the White Lightning moonshine business. Bert's wife, Rose, my great-grandmother, was an enterprising balabusta. The family had opened a dry goods store by then, and customers knew to tap a sterling silver cup, probably a kiddish cup, on the counter. For 10 cents, Rose would pour you a swig of moonshine from the pickle barrel. Same cup for everyone. I just love the warmth, the hospitality, and the balabustedness of that all.
But Rose, also famously, she didn't run a brothel. I want to be clear about that.
Yeah.
However, she rented these rooms behind the store to women who were climbing their own crooked ladder to success.
Yes.
And there's a diamond ring that's been passed around the family that we all say we know how Rose got that diamond ring. It was earned from the women who rented those rooms, and this what this story reminds me of, is, and I repeat this story to say, We weren't going to be awarded those Einstein visas to come into the country. Part of the family were furriers in Russia. These were some were not as educated as you need to be to get one of these immigration places. Now, we just we benefited from more open immigration policies. My great-grandfather in Russia had been a swayback mule junk dealer going shtetl to shtetl, selling, pots and pans. And so this is where we came from. We were so fortunate. And to not extend that welcome to others it's criminal to me. This is the memory that guides my life now and how I try to look at the world. And it's funny, I just want to mention, I've had sort of the word, return to Shuva, to Judaism, because I really tried to get away from being Jewish. After growing up with this Jewish identity, and then from Alabama, then in Miami Beach, where it was a kind of Judaism that was related to community, but also to wearing a fantastic dress at services and the high holidays, which actually I think is also fantastic. Let me just say, I love a fantastic dress, but I really wanted to rebel against that kind of congregational Judaism as I went out into the world. And what I didn't realize growing up in that more conservative community was that you can craft your own way of even Jewish rituals and identities. So here in Los Angeles, we're funky. We do things like Somewhere Over the Rainbow, Seder Over the Rainbow, the Wizard of Oz themed Seders, where people are in cosplay outfits as characters from the Wizard of Oz. And to be a part of this at this moment now seemed really essential.
And I'm so glad you said that, because I want to posit that I feel like a lot of people got away from thinking even about our roots, our family's roots. I mean, I know my grandparents came here, they were always one step ahead of the Nazis. Having 10/7 happen made us feel or want to know even more about our ancestry, because it is such a part of our DNA that all of a sudden we were faced with it. We were faced with the feeling that, yes, we've touched on anti-Semitism throughout our lives maybe and seen it, but in this very visceral way that our ancestors dealt with on a daily basis. I can't remember who it was who said, "We are not Jews on trembling knees," and we are not. And so that is part of this, sharing the truth, sharing our stories, working to build empathy in some way as well. I mean, tzedakah is an important part of the religion, which is giving back.
I just did Tashlich, which is, I still am a non-congregational person, but I love any holiday that involves a meal, any kind of celebration, or chance for reflection. So that, that's, and you can do Jewish anywhere, as my friend Lisa Hosting, who's the editor at Hadassah magazine, likes to say. And I quote her in my piece because when I was in Uganda, working with these young people, they came to northern Uganda after escaping the violence in South Sudan. Their journey, a pogrom for short, reminded me so much of the journey of our ancestors. And I had getting a chance to create some art with them and give them a moment of being children again. This is the aim of this particular project. We can't solve all the problems in the world, but it is still incumbent upon us to take actions. That's the concept of Pirkei Avot.
Well, you are two amazing supporters and women and writers. And I want to ask each of you, what advice do you have for Jewish writers?
I think that people underestimate the power of art. I think that one excellent way of helping people find empathy is by allowing them to live another life through fiction or through memoir, through something else, and to realize that we really do need to stop thinking of people who are not like us as the other. I think that we should tell our stories, write our stories. Don't be afraid to speak out, to be calm about it. And I think it's also in our actions. I mean, to me, that's like one of the Jewish things. How you act reflects on what you believe and what you do. And like, being kind to there's migrants in your neighborhood. Be kind to them because usually, and other people will watch this because usually people are afraid of what they don't know. That is why we find most anti-Semitism or anti-anything in really small rural places where everybody has gone to the same church and there's no diversity whatsoever. And then all of a sudden somebody realizes, oh my God, my Uncle Jim is gay and I love my Uncle Jim. Like, and it changes your thinking. So I think we really have to approach the whole idea that the other isn't the other. The other is really us. We're all like one human being, and we need to make those connections.
That's beautiful. And Caroline, when I read your piece and you wrote about people looking for your horns, I remember my dad telling me when he lived in Atlanta briefly and worked for a company, there was a meeting and then somebody said, oh, we were talking about your horns. Can we see them? And they legitimately
They
thought
believed it. I
he
know.
had horns. And he was like, you can feel, but there are no horns, there's no horns. And it's just everything that you've said about being other. And we're so sensitized today to other, except for other Jewish people. So let's
Right.
include, everybody in the other and being sensitive to them. And Annabelle, what would Rose say about all that?
Well, I'm not sure what Rose would say. However, I love everything Caroline said. There's just one thing I would add, and this is something that just occurred to me that I think is important, whether you're Jewish or not Jewish or anything, and you're a writer, is the phrase, I don't know. When I think and say the phrase to myself as I write and as I live, I don't know. I don't know how things should turn out in the Middle East or what the answer is. I don't know. I don't know is the start of the questions that I ask myself every day when I sit down to write, when I'm writing about something that starts with, I don't know. How can I know? How can I investigate this? But to come from the humility and the curiosity. I think curiosity for the other, for life, for a better future is a really good place to start because it's such a fraught time. And I think that the tendency when we are frightened is reactivity, and this is the answer and that is the answer and this is the problem and these people and I don't know. It's a very scary and vulnerable place to be, but to live with that question is a good question for any writer and a good question for any human right now.
Yes.
I think during these really difficult times is, I don't know what the answer is, but I know what my values are, and to be guided by that, to be guided by values and not necessarily what I think is the first answer is to me how I'm surviving right now, because it's really hard to be in the world right now and see so much suffering.
Definitely. And that's a beautiful way to end. I thank you both so much for contributing your stories to today and to this fabulous book on being Jewish now, which is something that everyone who wants to understand the perspectives and what authors, influencers, activists, people who are in the trenches and who are dealing with it from all different levels have to say. And it's really a valuable book, and it's an important time in Jewish history. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Want to give
Estelle.
everyone hugs. Everyone here and
Thank you,
everyone.
Annabelle. Thank you
Group
so much,
hug.
Estelle.
Thank
This
you.
was wonderful, just wonderful.
This was so great. Thank you. Follow me at estelleserasmus.com on my website and on social media, which is Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Estelle S. Erasmus. And we're now on YouTube for Freelance Writing Direct. Follow along, and soon everyone will be reading what you're writing.